All right, let's literally whiteboard the Minnesota Vikings, the Bears' Week 1 opponent. Vikings are a 1.5-point favorite at Soldier Field in a big spot for JJ McCarthy in his first ever NFL start on the road. Some people are surprised the Vikings are favored. Based on last year's results, though, probably makes sense. So it's a big spot on Monday Night Football. Before we get into some of the specifics, we talk big picture with the Minnesota Vikings, what they did in the offseason. $267 million spent in free agency. That was second in the NFL. And a theme we'll be watching throughout the NFC North this entire season. Minnesota, Chicago, Detroit all have 3 new starters on the interior of their offensive line. All 3 teams. The Lions, they moved one guy over, Graham Glasgow, to center, but it's still 3 new guys starting in different positions. Minnesota, regression candidate possibly. Why? Well, most people are going to point to the fact that they were 9-1 in one-score games last season, and they were also first in takeaways. Forgot to write that in there. That's hard to replicate from one season to the next, to go 9-1 in one-score games, and also takeaways tend to dip from year to year, change and fluctuate because there's turnover luck. Not to say they can't do it again, but chances are that's going to be hard to replicate. So a lot of people think the Vikings are a regression candidate. One advantage they have, and the Bears have this too, being with a rookie, well, both of them are second-year quarterbacks, but on a rookie contract, Vikings 30th in quarterback spending. That allows you to go out and spend $267 million in free agency. And they spent money on the trenches. Now, the only thing is you look at their additions. Jonathan Allen, Javon Hargrave, Will Fries, Ryan Kelly. These are familiar names, but 3 of those guys are over 30 years old. Typically, spending that much money on guys over 30 usually doesn't work. Not to say it can't for the Vikings, but usually that does not work out. Look at the coaching staff. Kevin O'Connell going into year 4. He was in the same hiring cycle as Matt Eberflus. Obviously, it's worked out a lot better for the Vikings. 34-17. Has not won a playoff game, though. Brian Flores in his 3rd year as defensive coordinator, and he has caused a lot of problems for the Bears. This is one of the more interesting stats you're going to find, I think, in Week 1. Flores 3-1 against the Bears in 4 opportunities, only allowing 16 points per game. And really, in 3 of those outings, the Vikings only allowed 12 points per game. There was the one comeback last year that kind of inflated that number. But when he goes up against the Lions, which is obviously relevant because of Ben Johnson, 0-4, never beat Ben Johnson head-to-head when it was Lions versus Vikings, and was giving up nearly double the amount of points per game, 30.5. So obviously Ben Johnson doesn't have the same players, but you're going to think in this matchup it's probably not going to be as bad anymore, as only scoring about 12 points per game. And realistically, though, it's not like the Bears are going to be able to score 30. Somewhere in the middle would make sense. Matt Daniels is a special teams coach for the Vikings going into his 4th year. He's been with Kevin O'Connell the entire time. They were bad in the return game last year. Basically no return game. Near the bottom of the league in both punt return and kick return. They drafted Ty Felton out of Maryland to hopefully fix that. Look at our marquee matchup, though. We're going to talk about it. Brian Flores versus Ben Johnson, the Bears offense versus the Minnesota defense. Drawing this up in 11 personnel, even though we think the Bears are going to use plenty of 12. Looking at the Vikings defense, somewhat surprisingly a couple weeks ago, they traded their nose tackle Harrison Phillips to the New York Jets. So obviously sort of double downing on the additions they made on the trenches. But that move did surprise me a little bit. Very exotic defense. You probably know this at this point. Brian Flores, he is going to try to create numbers games, showing that he's going to maybe rush 8, then drop everybody back in coverage, or bring the house with cover 0 on the back end. But what's interesting about what Brian Flores does, a lot of times you think blitz is, then you're going to play man defense. He's not afraid to play zone while blitzing. That leaves some what I would call unsound coverages on the back end to exploit if you can block it up. Protect the right way. Now, one thing that Ben Johnson's done so well against Brian Flores, and Nate Tice broke this down really well on the Hoge and Johns podcast last week. Really what Brian Flores wants to do is create extra unused blockers. So you're showing you're going to send everybody, you bring in extra blockers, and then you back up, and you might have 2 guys standing back here blocking nobody, and only 2 guys running routes into all of this nonsense. That is what Brian Flores has been so good at. What Ben Johnson's been good at is avoiding that. and having things blocked up correctly. So that's why when you talk about Drew Dahlman coming in at center, Caleb Williams taking the next step under Ben Johnson's coaching, what they figure out pre-snap and what they recognize in this football game is going to be so huge to create those mismatches. Because we start to talk about some of these matchups that the Bears have in this game. I mean, I don't have to highlight this too much, but with the Bears left tackle situation, Jonathan Grenard going up against Braxton Jones is concerning. There's no doubt about it. However, in the Bears' advantages, DJ Moore against Okudah, Isaiah Rodgers going up against Rome Odunze, Olamide Zaccheaus with the training camp that he just had. The Bears should have opportunities to be open in the secondary if everything's blocked up correctly. That's a big if, obviously, with Caleb Williams recognizing what he's seen. But what I find interesting about this defense is as much as we think of them blitzing, they were still only 15th overall in actual pressure rate last season. So it's not like they're always getting home. But what Brian Flores is so good is at creating confusion. And so the more Ben Johnson can help Caleb Williams limit that confusion, much like he was able to do with Jared Goff in Detroit, that to me is going to be what decides this football game most likely on Monday night. Now as we move to the other side of the ball, Vikings offense versus the Bears defense. The Vikings last year, what's interesting, they only lost to 2 teams. If you include the playoffs, they went 14-4, but they lost twice to the Lions, they lost twice to the Rams. And they allowed 9 sacks in that playoff game to the Rams. So they're hoping that their beefed up interior, which includes spending money on Ryan Kelly and Will Fries from the Colts, and then drafting Donovan Jackson in the first round, 24th overall, putting him in at left guard, is going to really help them on their offensive line because they quite frankly need it. Now, what I find interesting is this might surprise you. Under Kevin O'Connell, since he got there, the Vikings are actually 27th in the league in rushing attempts. They're only 29th in yards per carry. This has been a passing offense. As much as we think about how great the offense has been, and it has been, they really have not been that good at running the football. So that is what's interesting to me because JJ McCarthy is a very different quarterback than Sam Darnold. Sam Darnold last year threw for 4,300 yards, 35 touchdowns. He led the league in deep ball. So they were a deep ball team. When I think of JJ McCarthy, that's not what I think about. So there is going to be a pretty significant offensive adjustment that is needed here with the Vikings this season to have success for JJ McCarthy, and that involves running the football. So there's some big ifs on this side as well. You know, look at Sam Darnold. He actually led the league in turnover-worthy plays last season, but only threw 12 interceptions. So he got away with a lot. I think JJ McCarthy's probably going to do a better job of limiting those turnover-worthy plays because he doesn't really turn it over a whole lot. At least that's what I expect. But in order to do that, they're going to have to run the football better than they have. So they also went out and they signed Jordan Mason in the offseason to help Aaron Jones. There's reason for optimism here with the Vikings. But a lot of it, just like on this side of the ball with Caleb Williams, is going to fall on the shoulders of JJ McCarthy. In terms of the key matchups here, this is the big one, right? How healthy is Jalen Johnson going up against Justin Jefferson? Johnson said yesterday that if the game was yesterday, he probably wouldn't have been able to play. And if that's the case, I find it hard to believe that he's going to be able to shadow Justin Jefferson across the field in this matchup. Otherwise, they went out and they traded for Adam Thielen. He's caused the Bears plenty of problems in the past. So if Jalen Johnson's not able to go and Deshaun Wright out there with Tyreek Stevenson, that could be a big test for the Bears. But otherwise, the depth at wide receiver for this Vikings team is still not that good. So here's your whiteboard look at the Minnesota Vikings. Shout out to my wife, Chris, who did a great job filming this.